because this Michigan team can score. It's not like there's some stagnant bunch that relies on their defense.
Welcome to the street.
I think he can win us games. I think, thank you for your service, Cliff. But I go back and watch last year.
We've got a little baby version of Wendell White, Reggie Bush cooking with Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. Katron Allen runs the ball. Nobody wants to tackle him. People bounce off.
Hey, straight from the Crest listeners. Stat Guy Chris here to remind you that this episode is brought to you in part by friends over at Protocol Beverage. Made by a few dudes in Erie, PA who wondered, why doesn't zero-carb beer exist? Protocol's new light shift gives you the ultimate beer experience with 0 carbs, a mere 80 calories, and they're shifting to what light beer should be. Savor the crisp, refreshing taste without compromising on flavor. Thanks, Protocol.
Welcome back to the Straight from the Crest podcast. I'm your host, Michael David Kresvich. Garrett Bastardi joins the show today as we're going to recap Penn State's win over Washington, preview the Nittany Lions game this weekend against Purdue, and give a preview of the entire college football landscape. First and foremost, I want to say this episode is brought to you by Protocol Beverage. Link in bio. Must be 21 to enjoy. Garrett, Penn State didn't have that letdown spot. You picked them to lose. They went on to just put together a dominating performance on both ends of the ball. Do you have anything to say to our listeners and viewers who you predicted a Penn State upset?
Yeah, if you set your standards low and they exceed them, you're always going to be happy. And so, I think that there's been a few times. I think this is the third time I've picked Penn State to lose this year, just off of history, right? I'm just going off of what I've seen my entire life, and they keep I'm happy with getting proved wrong. This is definitely the most complete performance that we've seen from Penn State. And it could have been even bigger than 35-6. It turned into a ref show in the third quarter. An atrocious, holding call and a kick return by Nick Singleton. Don't know what a catch is, which is just the, I guess going to be a tale as old as time. What is an incomplete pass for Ohio State is a catch and fumble for Penn State. So all in all, 35-6 dub, and it could have been 56-3. There was a couple things that went against us to make it even worse. But looking forward to the last 3 weeks of the season, of the regular season, a really, really big opportunity with everything lined up out ahead of the Nittany Lions, and we'll talk about the college football playoff, the rankings, and just kind of where this leaves Penn State in the landscape of a pretty chaotic scene across the country. A lot to still unfold as we close out November.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State's now 10-6 in full stadium whiteouts. They just did everything right, Garrett. They were 10 for 13 on third down. These stats that we talk about every week, how to avoid an upset, what they could have done better against Ohio State. They were 10 for 13 on third down. They rushed for nearly 200 more yards than Washington. They did have one more penalty, but as you said, and we respect refs on this podcast, and they won the possession battle. I think so. We have to. A lot of referees listen to this, so we have to.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Maybe some family members who are referees.
Yeah, but let's start on the offensive side of the ball, because first of all, Julian Fleming, first career Penn State touchdown.
Yes.
8th of his career. He finally gets the end zone. I thought Liam Clifford had 2 really nice catches. Trey Wallace had a great game on the receiving end, 5 catches, 84 yards, and Warren did his thing. That dude's a beast. What was the most impressive thing on the offensive side in your eyes for the Penn State during its win Saturday?
I really do love that this coaching staff is ears to the ground when it comes to social media going crazy about not getting the ball to 44 in short range scenarios, because it seemed like in any way possible in this game we were going to give the ball to Tyler Warren inside the 5, however we could. Still, it's going to forever be hard to let this staff off the hook for not just at least one time trying to send Tyler Warren over the top, which he's had amazing amount of success for in short yardage situations. But yeah, I mean, I liked watching Corey Smith come in and go 5 carries for 95 yards, big 78-yarder at the end of the game. The receivers were a little bit better as the game went on. A little bit concerned about Singleton. Still, I will, obviously he's got something up, as Coach Franklin said, a nagging injury. But all in all, there's just not a lot to complain about overall. Would still like to see prior to the injury, more Nick Singleton. But we just don't know the extent of what was going on early in the game. He looked pretty explosive on the kickoff return. But yeah, there's just not a lot to complain about offensively. Defensively, I know we'll get to that, but obviously a lot more pressure brought. I mean, they were going engage 8 the entire end of the game, which was a lot of fun. So it's all in all a very complete performance against a team that, not as good as last year, but was in the national championship game last year.
Yeah, speaking of the defense, I thought it was, when Williams came in the second half for Will Rogers, I thought it was kind of a hat tip to Penn State's coaching staff to be able to adjust to 2 different quarterbacks, because they saw kind of that prototype passer in the first half of Will Rogers, which he scrambled a little bit. And Williams is a terrific athlete, by the way.
Yeah.
He if they play him, I think like he was outrunning everyone. And granted the last 2 possessions, Penn State's ones weren't in, but yeah, 5 team sacks, Abdul Carter 2, Jalen Reed came with the interception, which I don't know. That looked like that was the easiest interception in Penn State football history in center field there. But as you mentioned, the run game was awesome. I thought Katron Allen. Oh, and Nick Singleton did practice. He was a full participant today. He looks a lot better. He looked good there. But the running game was awesome. I love the way they got everyone involved, especially late there. Really wanted to see Corey Smith get in the end zone. It was pretty neat to see the sideline support for him. And then they tried to get him in the end zone. And they gave it to Katron Allen there to kind of ice the game away. But yeah, just a dominating performance. Tyler Warren became the 3rd Big Ten tight end to rush for 3 touchdowns in a single season. The first was in 1956, since 1968. And then he was the first Big Ten tight end since 2018 to do that. James Franklin in his in the press conference, they talked about the game. He talked about they needed to limit Jonah Coleman. Me and you both said they got to completely shut down Washington's offense. They did that. On the defensive side, let's talk defense here. Who really, outside of Abdul Carter, who or what really impressed you the most for Penn State? Because I know you mentioned the blitz. Was it the ability to finally get to the passer?
Yeah, I think just having, the amount of pressures was something that we hadn't really seen throughout the year on a consistent basis. The ability to get off the field on 3rd down, just a lot of complementary defensive football, across the board. Jalen Reed, obviously, with the interception. Kobe King played well, 7 total tackles, 4 solo. Obviously Abdul Carter came to play. But there was a lot of guys. I thought AJ Harris plays well week in, week out. And, there's not a whole lot to complain about. There wasn't a whole lot of, standing out outside of 11. Everybody was just at a pretty high level overall. Thought Zion Tracy continues to improve week in, week out. So once again, good that we did not cut him after the block in the back against Illinois on the pick 6. So he has continued to play better. But yeah, just not a whole lot of complaints. You get that performance. So the last 3 games of the year, you're going to have pretty comfortable wins in all 3.
So 3:30 Saturday on CBS. The last time that we saw Penn State in this CBS spot was that thriller against USC a few weeks back. You want to guess the get-in price for this game for Penn State and Purdue?
It's got to be under $1.
It's $5 right now. I'm seeing.
Man, inflation is hitting us hard.
In. I know.
It's tough.
A lot of big changes the last couple of weeks have definitely done that. But as I love to show off with Garrett, Purdue has more wins against top 2 teams than any school in FBS history. They had going into the year just a brutal strength of schedule. They played before the season started on paper based on last year's teams. This is a team that had the 8th toughest schedule in the country. These 2 teams last met in 2022, that crazy game that had 8 lead changes. Penn State has won 8 in a row. This is a Purdue team that's lost 8 in a row this year. They opened up the season with a 49-0 win against Indiana State. Their closest game is a 1-point game on the road to Illinois a few weeks back that had almost 100 combined points scored. They're off a 45-0 shutout against Ohio State where they turned the ball over twice, accounted for just 206 yards, and went 2 for 12 on 3rd down. Immediate expectations this week. What must Penn State avoid to to kind of finish. They're 3 steps away from the college football playoff. What must they avoid to avoid this monster upset, I guess?
Yeah, and I don't know if you can hear the squeaking or not. Excuse that if my dog is decided to play with her loudest toy right behind me. So I don't know if you can hear it, but it's distracting me a little bit. Yeah, outside of about 20 minutes of football against Illinois a few weeks back, where Purdue suddenly discovered how to play football, they have been pretty atrocious since that week 1 victory against Indiana State. And so it's got to be worked in. Like, it's got to go in, get up 35-42 nothing, get the backups in, stay healthy. It's got to be that. Again, it can't be 17-10 at the half, 14-3 at the half. It's got to be, and I think the coaching staff is going to be very aware of that. It's got to be get guys in, get the lead, then get the backups in as quick as possible. That has to be the mindset. Play a really good half of football, and then get out of there and prepare for what's going to be probably the season against Minnesota in about 10 days here on the road, November 23rd. So again, this is Kent State. This is I don't want to say Bowling Green because we didn't perform very well against Bowling Green, but it's a Kent State type game. Get in, get out, stay healthy.
Yeah, we're not going to spend too much time on this game. We'll do our brief personnel flyover, give our predictions for his touchdown score, and then the back end of the show, we're gonna discuss college football. The second week of rankings came out. We're gonna talk about different paths because there are a lot of paths in different conferences. It's chaos right now. But that being said, this is a team that's lost 8 in a row, Garrett. They're coming home against a very, very talented Penn State bunch. Second-year head coach, 4th youngest head coach in FBS, Ryan Walters, the former defensive coordinator at Illinois. He spent time at Missouri. Pretty uncharacteristic of the Boilermakers here to bring in a defensive guy. It's their first defensive-minded head coach since Leon Burnett ran the program back in 1986. Offensive coordinator Graham Harrell. Defensive coordinator is Kevin Kane. On the offensive side of the ball, Hudson Card is their quarterback. He has 8 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Devin Mockabee, also known as Crazy Legs, walk-on for the program. He's been last year he had a pile of 100-yard performances. And also they brought over Reggie Love III, transfer, who has 2 touchdowns. Maccabee's their number 1. Love III's their number 2. And their leading receiver is Max Clare, tight end, who has 475 and a pair of scores. And on the Purdue side of the football, on the defensive end, Kydron Jenkins has 5.5 sacks. He's having a great year. He was excellent last year, one of the greatest edge rushers in the Big Ten. And Kendrick Breelove leads the team with 3 interceptions. I don't know what or how much you've got to see this team play. I watched the Illinois game and I watched a little bit of the Ohio State game last week. But from what you've seen this year, is this a Kent State team or are they a little better?
I wouldn't say they're as bad as Kent State. There's just not a whole lot they do very well. In most metrics, they're 15th or worse in the Big Ten out of 18 teams. The only thing I could say that they're okay at is they are able to get some pressure on the quarterback. I say some. Like, this is relative to what they where they're at the rest of their defensive stats or rankings. And so it's a Big Ten team. Ryan Walters is a good defensive coach. I think part of his problem is he's trying to play a style that it just does not mix with the athletes that Purdue has. And so they like to press man, they like to be aggressive, and they tend to get burned when that happens. And so there are going to be opportunities for big plays. I just don't really see how they're going to be able to stop Penn State on a consistent basis. Whether Penn State has a bunch of deep throws or not, I think they're just going to be able to control the line of scrimmage on both sides. And that's what we've seen from this team over the last several years. Overmatched opponents, if they can get the ground game going, they're able to overwhelm other teams. I'd say, what is the recipe for an upset? I don't really know if it's there because, you think of Bowling Green, they had a really, really good offensive coaching staff. They had a really good former SEC player, freshman of the year in Connor Bazelak at quarterback, who they went the next week and almost beat a pretty good A&M team on the road as well. And so I just don't really see a Purdue having the game playmakers on offense to be able to even entertain the idea of an upset here. So I hope my confidence doesn't come back to bite me, but this is one where I think we can be pretty confident that this should be a cover and a get in, like I said, a get in and get out type of game.
Yeah, listen, I mean, the best thing Penn State could have done after losing Ohio State, the goal the rest of the season before playoffs, is to pick up momentum each week and pick up convincing wins. They did that last week. They're going to have to do it again this week on the road. But if they can string together 4 very convincing wins, I know the fan base itself and the players have to feel some sort of extra jolt. Because, I mean, they start a season 7-0 or 8-0, I'm sorry. They drop a game to Ohio State, and there's got to be some sort of swagger. They need to get back, and they started that last week, and I think that continues into this week. I have the score. I think this is a Purdue cover. I do. I think this is a 38-10 type of game. Wouldn't be surprised if it was a sluggish start for the Nittany Lions. I don't think it's close at any point. But that being said, I don't see a blowout here. I see it being closer, almost closer than last week, just because Purdue's ability to play that smash mouth defense. I wouldn't be surprised if Drew has kind of a weird turnover early or late that gives them a spark of momentum. And it is a tough pace to play. I mean, they're 0-8 in the Big Ten, but this is a team at the end of the day. They have the most wins. Like, something goes on there, unless, like we saw in Ohio State. I mean, granted, this Purdue team is nowhere as talented as that team with Raheem Mostert and just crazy Purdue players that were part of its offense that beat Ohio State a few years ago. But yeah, I think I have this game 38-10. What about you? Give me your score prediction and who's scoring the first touchdown. Oh, we had Bo Prabila scoring the first touchdown last week.
Yeah. Neither of us picked that, right? I like Penn State. I do like a cover. I think it's going to be something like 48-7, 48-7, 48-3. I'm trying to scope out the way that this could be be close. I could see a sluggish start. Ohio State had a sluggish start against these guys, and Purdue marched down the field and missed a field goal from the inside the 5-yard line. So, maybe they come out and this is their Super Bowl. But even if that's the case, I still think Penn State finds a groove. One of the worst rushing defenses in the country, the worst rushing defense in the Big Ten. Penn State should really grind this team. They're also one of the worst time of possession teams in the country. And I could see a bunch of 6, 7, 8 minute drives that might prevent this from getting to be 48-7. It could be 38-7, but still I like to cover. Katron Allen first touchdown.
Let's do a show pick there. I'll tail you with that. Katron Allen first touchdown. After you said the rushing stat, I'm sold on it. He's been running the ball very well. He has incredible vision, and it's weird because running backs like that don't pick that up. Like, they either have it or they don't. Like, vision is something you have. It's intangible, and he looks amazing in the open space. So I'll give it to Katron Allen too. But just survive in advance. But they need to do more than survive. They need a convincing win. Need to keep building, because obviously the committee's watching, as is America. But let's switch our focus here to the whole landscape of college football. We typically do this around this time of the year, where we expand our horizon. I want to start with this. Georgia went from being the odds-on favorite, Garrett, to winning the national title, to dropping out of the top 10, and they're fighting for their season this week against Tennessee. What's going on with the Bulldogs? Are they going to survive here? What's going on?
Yeah, they're, if anybody has been following, there's a lot of consternation or whatever you want to call it at how the rankings are shaping up, and a certain media network has all the SEC rights now, ESPN, and they're the ones who host all the playoffs and the playoff rankings and all this. And a lot of shade being thrown towards, teams like Penn State, for teams like Georgia, right? Georgia's 12, Ole Miss, 11, Alabama 10, Tennessee 7. I mean, all these teams are bunched up in one spot. And what's happened to Georgia is Carson Beck's just not a very good quarterback. They don't have Brock Bowers. They don't have Lab McConkey anymore. The secondary just isn't as good this year as usual, and I think part of that is because the offense isn't able to sustain drives as much, and so they're kind of on their heels a bit more. Not to mention, Georgia hasn't really played a tough schedule the last several years in the regular season, and so they've had to go to Texas, who they beat convincingly. Obviously lost to Alabama and then just lost to Ole Miss in a very convincing fashion. Ole Miss dominated the game, and so. I think Georgia's a very good team. I think they're a playoff caliber team. I think they're one of the top 8 or 9 teams in the country for sure. You got to win games. And so teams that are, you have personalities that are giving, Penn State grief. I saw a lot of Notre Dame Twitter today giving Penn State grief. I'm like, first of all, Penn State's strength of record is like 5th, right? And Notre Dame, I'm sorry, I don't care if you beat Navy 66-7 or Purdue 66-7. You lost to Northern Illinois, and it's not even like, oh man, it's a season of seasons for Northern Illinois. They're 5-5, right? You lost to a Northern Illinois team at home. Everybody after that loss was saying that was disqualifying. And how short memories are. Here we are, 8 weeks later, and it's like, oh well, why isn't Notre Dame ahead of Penn State? Because Penn State's worst loss, or the only loss, is a game down to the wire against who could arguably be the best team in the country in Ohio State. So. You asked about Georgia. I just think that it's very chaotic in that 6 through 14 range. A lot of teams can mix and match. I will say, with how the landscape is, you are going to get a lot of breathing down the neck of the committee members by the media, by ESPN, by all these schools, by all these places. Say, well, the SEC is just beating up on each other, and they're all really, really good. So you should let them all in, which means Penn State cannot slip up. There is no room for error. There was for a while. It seemed like, maybe 2 losses will get you in automatically. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think you have to win these last 3 games and have the ability. It's either hosting a home game or you're out. And so the margin's pretty fine. The line's pretty fine there. But yeah, it's the Dogs need quarterback play, and Carson Beck's been seeing a lot of ghosts this year.
Let's go from Dogs to Cougars here, Garrett. BYU, one of the 4 top undefeated teams, or one of the 4 last undefeated teams remaining. Yeah. They have 2 top 20 wins on the season. This week, they're challenging. They're going to have a challenge against Kansas. What are the Cougars about? And what can are they going to be the team that represents the Big 12 at the end of the season?
Yeah, so I think that, one thing you can count on, especially with Miami losing this past week and Iowa State really falling off the planet, is the Big 12 and the ACC are really going to have one representative each, and it's going to be whoever wins their conference title. No longer will there be kind of a bid stealer from either of those leagues. And so BYU currently is the favorite, but the team that is chugging along here that the media is going to lose their minds about if they are able to kind of come through is going to be Colorado. And so it really does come down to those 2, unless Colorado slips up. And so, BYU is they're an interesting team. They're similar to Indiana, when it comes to kind of strength of schedule. With that being said, BYU does have 2 pretty good wins. They went and beat SMU, who is, could very well win the ACC. And so, and they had a gritty win Saturday night at Utah, a game that Utah should have won. But the Big 12 is a fun league. I wouldn't exactly call it a good league. I'd say the ACC isn't a fun league, and they're also not a good league. So those 2 are just in a different class behind the Big 10 and the SEC. You see it talent roster wise, you see it kind of strength of record wise, but BYU is going to be one of those teams that, and we'll get into how the playoff kind of works and the structure of it because it's interesting. BYU will be one of those teams that, if you're a Tennessee or a Penn State or a Texas or an Ohio State who don't get one of the byes, conference champions get an auto bid and a bye. You're going to want to be slated in a game where if you win your round of 12 game, you play BYU in that round, because you're not going to want to play the Big 10 champ or the SEC champ, but BYU is going to be a team that you're going to want to play.
Things got pretty interesting this past weekend. Obviously, we talked about Georgia falling, but Ole Miss, I mean, they kept their playoff hopes alive with the win against Georgia. Bama steamrolls LSU. Tennessee's looking in. Who's playing for this SEC championship game, and how many teams in the SEC are going to get in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, right now there are, and our Ohio State insider Colin Spencer and I were going through this Saturday night. 1 second, let me throw this toy away from my dog so it doesn't squeak in my ear the whole time. But you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams that are still alive realistically to play their way into the SEC title game. Tennessee is in a driver's seat. Texas A&M's in the driver's seat, and so is and Texas. They all control their own destiny. And so it's just going to be, Tennessee wins out. They beat Georgia this weekend. They eliminate Georgia. They're going to go to the SEC title game. If A&M goes ahead and beats Auburn and then goes and beats Texas, they're in the SEC title game. And the same goes for Texas as well if they win out. So those three are kind of, like I said, controlling their own destiny. Alabama is in a really, really good position for an at-large bid. And so is Ole Miss. Both teams really do not have a tough way rest of their schedule on the way in. I would say LSU is probably eliminated. I would say Missouri is eliminated, and same with South Carolina. And so really what you're watching, you saw what's kind of cool. And I think people thought that playoff, or the playoff, the expanded playoff, was going to minimize regular season games. The Alabama LSU game, both teams with 2 losses in early November, felt pretty important this past weekend, right? I think this Georgia Tennessee game is going to feel pretty important as well. Georgia, with the potential of missing the playoff for the second straight year, backs against the wall at home against Tennessee. It's going to be a heck of an environment in Athens. And so if you had to, put a gun to my head, I guess, and ask me who I think is going to be in the SEC title game, I'd say Texas. It will be there, and that will come down to a massive rivalry game in the final week of the season against A&M to get in. I would say Texas probably ekes it out. And then it just all comes down to this Georgia-Tennessee game. If Georgia beats Tennessee, I don't know who the second team is going to be in there, because you're going to have, at this point, 6 teams at 5-2 with 1 week to go in the SEC. It's kind of a cluster F at this point. So, like I said, I think Texas is the favorite for 1 spot. And then it's anybody's game after the Georgia-Tennessee game if Georgia wins that game for that last spot.
Let's shift back to the Big Ten here. Indiana 10-0 for the first time in program history. Also, they have their bye at the perfect time. They're on a bye this week before they prepare for an Ohio State game. That will probably, the winner of that goes to the Big Ten game against Oregon, considering they went out. Let's talk a little Indiana football here. Just amazing story. One of the best stories right now in college football. They beat Michigan 2015 Saturday. Their defense looks really good. Indiana in the Big Ten title game?
Yeah. I don't know. They're going to have to get through the Buckeyes, but regardless, they are also just, I can't believe I'm saying it, like they are all but a lock, unless they lose 70-0 against Ohio State, they're all but a lock to get into the playoff, which is a pretty incredible feat. They do remind me, if you remember 2019 Minnesota, the team Penn State lost to on the road, remind me a lot of that program, a really kind of energetic, feisty coach. A team that is serviceable, that had a really easy schedule. The only difference is, Indiana's got one big game. Minnesota won their one big game, but then had to go play Iowa and Wisconsin, and Nebraska the last 3 weeks of the season, and so ended up losing, I believe, all 3. So, Indiana, we'll see. They're getting the bye at the perfect time, like you said. I can't imagine them Ohio State losing that game. If I had to pick, I would say that it's going to be a lot like Ohio State, Michigan State in 2022, I believe, where Ohio State was ranked 2nd or 3rd, and Michigan State was ranked 7th, and Ohio State was up 48-0 at the half, 49-0 at the half. I could see it being something like a 42-14 game, just because Indiana will not have played the athletes whatsoever that they're going to play on November 23rd. Not to damper down on the story, it's still incredible regardless, and they should be in the playoff at 11-1, barring, a catastrophe coming down the stretch.
Miami gets shocked by Georgia Tech, kind of creates a three-headed race in the ACC now with Clemson and SMU. Your thoughts with the Yellow Jacket win there over the Hurricanes?
The Hurricanes. Yeah. It was a long time coming. Miami had been playing with fire. I think we talked a little bit about it early in the season. They were on the road at Cal at freaking 2 a.m. and down 35-10 midway through the third, and Cal somehow squandered that. Miami, was in a back and forth shootout against Louisville. They live by Cam Ward and die by Cam Ward. That's really all they got. They are a very they're a product of the strength of their conference. They're good for their conference. They're a 3 or 4 loss team in the SEC, and they're a 3-loss team in the Big Ten, depending on who they catch. And so it did not shock me that they lost to Georgia Tech. Cam Ward is someone who, I say all the time that Ohio State made a mistake not going after him, because Ohio State would be unstoppable with a quarterback like that, because he's going to make a couple mistakes just because he's a gunslinger. He's also going to throw for 380 and have 4 touchdowns automatically every single game. He just had a couple turnovers against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech also is a giant slayer as of late. Brent Key is a really solid coach, and they go out and they dominate time of possession, do all the things that we talk about for a recipe for an upset. They dominate time of possession. They stay on the field on third down, and they get off the field on third down really well in the big games. And so it doesn't shock me Miami lost. They can't slip up, right? Clemson's sitting right there behind them. But if chalk holds, it's going to be SMU and Miami, which will be a very interesting game. SMU is obviously a program that, has kind of been in and out of the wilderness since the death penalty in the 80s. A lot of money pouring into that program now that they're in the Power 4 conference. And so that will be a really interesting game coming down the stretch if both teams are able to win out going into Charlotte for the ACC title game.
An overlooked conference, the Pac-12 right now. It's looking like Washington State and Oregon State are heading that. Your thoughts on the Pac-12, a deep Pac-12 that is.
Yeah, dude, they're playing home and home next year, which is just insane. Again, that's part of the realignment, and that sucks for them. The realignment, the TV deals, obviously there's been a ton of talk about the Big Ten TV deal, which is finally, it took 3 years, or 4 years really, it finally coming to a head. And hopefully there's enough public pressure to change what is just a catastrophe of a deal. Ohio State is going to play 6 straight noon games to finish off a season. And then what else happens? You screw over teams like Oregon State and Washington State. And so, if I had to pick, it's going to be one of those two to win the conference. I'd assume they're going to both play in the conference title game. But you could correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not really sure.
I think you're right there. We're about 5 weeks away from that opening college football round playoff game.
Yeah.
Which means we're about 9 weeks away from that national title game. Right now, as we're sitting here on November 13th, the year of our Lord 2024. No, just 2024.
Wow, we're in the future.
Who is playing in the national title game?
Yeah, good question. Kind of to contextualize things, in Penn State's, and we're a Penn State podcast. So the highest Penn State can be, barring Ohio State somehow losing to Indiana, and then losing to, I don't even know how it would work, honestly. Ohio State would have to lose to Indiana, and then Indiana have to lose to Oregon. Penn State's pretty much, if they win their last 3, they're pretty much locked in to the 6th seed. Okay. So it's what's interesting is, and again, I think it's going to change in the future because I think it's pretty dumb, but the 5 the Power 4 conferences and then one of the group of 5 get auto bids, but then the top 4 of those 5 get a bye. So even Ohio State could be ranked 2nd in the college football playoff at the end of the year, but if they don't beat Oregon, they're going to be 5th. They're going to be the highest ranked at large. So it's just weird to wrap your mind around. So you're wanting to be kind of in that sweet spot of 6, 7 hosting a playoff game and then trying to hopefully get BYU or Miami in the quarterfinals. And so, the question being who do I think is going to play in the national championship game? So much of it rides on draw. Look, Texas gets, I'm looking at the with these rankings last night, Texas would be the 2 seed, right? Texas gets absolutely hosed if they have to play Alabama in the quarterfinal, right? If Alabama beats Indiana, right? While Penn State is the 6 seed, I would love to be playing BYU as a 3 seed. Ohio State, there's a chance that if Ohio State beats Oregon, right, and they're the 1 seed, and Georgia is the 8 seed, or Alabama is the 8 seed, like Ohio State having to play Alabama, I could say Ohio State's the best team. That game is almost a pick-em, right? So long answer, trying to contextualize everything. If I had to pick the 2 best teams, I think it's Oregon and Ohio State. I don't think they're going to play in the national championship. So right now, I'd probably pick Ohio State to play Alabama in the national title. That might surprise some people, but when I go through the list, I don't think Texas is as good as people think. Indiana, no. Notre Dame, no. Tennessee, no. Boise State, no. Miami, no. BYU, no. It comes down to who do I think has the best studs? And I think Jalen Milroe, when he's playing well, is kind of unstoppable. So Alabama at their best is one of the top 2 or 3 teams. And so given the draw, I would say it's those 2 playing in the national title game. I can't stress enough though. And I think we'll probably be having this conversation, throughout the rest of the year, every week, but where teams end up seeding wise is just so the playoffs going to be wild because you're just going to have random teams playing each other in random locations. And the last thing I'll say is it's not like college basketball where if you win your conference, you're in, but you don't get an auto seed. Here it's 4 teams could be getting buys when teams that are better have to play into them. So pretty crazy setup going to be happening, which is going to be all more reason to tune in to the pod and then tune into the rest of the football season.
Yeah, we'll continue this here the rest of the season for the concluding weeks, and we'll continue to do the Penn State coverage. But the back end of the show, we'll bring some other people on from different conferences. My boys in the South are going to hop on. My SEC guys, we're going to talk that. But Garrett, thank you very much. As always, everyone, thank you for your support. Really appreciate it. We will be back next week for the game preview. Hopefully Penn State can escape this injury-free, turnover-free, do what they have to do. But thank you guys very much.